Waldy and Bendy.
Hello and welcome to Waldy and Bendy's Adventures in Art, the podcast they could not stop, though they did have a jolly good try. So, yes, we've been away for quite a while, but we are back. And I'm still Waldemar Januszczak, art critic of the Sunday Times, and I'm joined at the helm of this wonky galleon by a man they call the Baron of the Borders. In fact, he goes by many names. His parents christened him Bendor Grosvenor, but the gods of art wanted more, so they call him Bendy, and that's what we call him too. Bendy, how are you? How's it going up there in the Borders?
Oh, here in the Scottish Borders, it's a lovely day, but I am so pleased to be back talking to you down the ether. There you are in France, and we're reunited again. This is so exciting. I was just saying to producer Taya earlier that I'm a little bit nervous because we haven't done this for so long, but here we are. We're plotting world domination again.
I know. I was nervous until I saw your face, and then it was like the sun coming up in the morning. I mean, it was like a beam of glory. I loved it. How's the farm going? That's what I'm really looking forward to hearing about. The donkeys, the chickens, the horses, and all that.
Oh, the donkeys are fine. They hopefully will go on forever. Actually, we've just had the harvest, and Val, I have to report, it's not been a good year
Oh.
because no, we've had a drought, and the spring barley I heard only this morning, hence the frown on my farming face, did not meet the grade for malting whiskey, which means we have to sell it for cattle feed, which is a big fat loss for our spring barley this year.
That's tragic. And I have this
Terrible.
image of you out there with your scythe, scything the barley, counting every single sheaf of barley, thinking how many bottles of whiskey it'll make. And all that's gone down the spout, has it?
Yeah, it's been a very bad year. So expect the price of your favorite tipple. I know you're a keen whiskey drinker. I think that's going to go up very soon because it's been a bad year.
Oh, I'll have to change brands. But I'll tell you what, though, you've been busy. I know you've been busy. You've got a very, very important book that's gone out, haven't you?
That's kept me occupied while I had to enforced absence from you. Yes, I wrote a book, came out last year called The Invention of British Art, which you very kindly gave me a blurb for. Bless you. So all my sales have been down to you. So that's been fun to go out and promote. But that's coming to an end now. So here we are, new challenges.
Yeah, we'll talk about the book on I think a program soon. It's certainly worth it, and I enjoyed it. So anyway, later in the podcast, Bendy, you're going to be introducing us to a very strange painting with a sexual message, but a sort of mysterious sexual message, and we'll be trying to decipher that. That's coming up because it's very murky. But first of all, I think it's been a frantic few weeks in the art world, and I think we need to get our listeners up to date with the turmoil. It's shocking news from the art world. Yes, shocking news from the art world, or at least unexpected news. Now, top of my list, Bendy, is the fact that the National Gallery, having just gone through this enormous 200-year anniversary celebration, having been closed all over the place for several years, has just announced that it's going to go into another one of these great rebuilds with a whole new wing being opened up at the back of the Sainsbury wing. Have you heard about that?
Yeah, this is astonishing news. In fact, this is a little plot behind the Sainsbury wing in the National Gallery. It's currently a hotel. It's called Trafalgar Hotel or something. But the National Gallery bought the land in the 1990s. Neil McGregor, very far-sighted director, bought the plot of land, hoping that one day this would be the site of a new wing. And now they're going to build it, which is very exciting, I think. And the most astonishing thing is, did you see this in the announcement that they've already raised nearly 350 million pounds to do
I
it?
think it's even more than that. 375 million quid already for what I guess is going to cost 450 million, something like that. I mean, it's a major undertaking, and of course, I'm excited by it, and I'm leaping up and down as happily as you are. I suppose, except for a couple of things, right? One, I'm just a bit fed up with museums rebuilding themselves all the time. I'm old enough to like to go into a place and sort of know where I am. And we've had this major rebuild of the National Gallery, which opened this year, and they rehang the entire collection, which I think most people thought was very, very successful, and they've really enjoyed it. The only grumpy voice was me, and I enjoyed most of it, but I had a couple of issues with the big rehang. Above all, I just thought that their policy of trying to make each picture exciting made it difficult to follow the bigger storylines of art. So it was just slightly difficult to see where we were in the storyline. But of course, it's a fabulous collection, and it was very gracefully done, and it's exciting, and people love it. So I'm not going to moan about that. But what does worry me is the fact that if we're going to go into another one of these rebuilds, rooms are going to be closed again. And it's like, that you can't drive down a road these days without somebody putting up a new roadwork on it, and you're having constantly to go to these temporary traffic lights. It feels the same way going to art galleries, don't you think?
It's beginning to get a bit like that, but I don't know. I have to say I totally sympathise with you. For the last few years, National Gallery's been a bit of a pain to visit as they've closed half the place. But this new wing is on a dedicated plot, but there's a sort of separation between it, so I think it shouldn't be too disruptive. Do you know? I was working out the amount of money that the current director, Sir Gabriele Finaldi, newly knighted, has raised in his tenure. So including the Sainsbury Wing and various picture acquisitions, he's over £500 million. Now, that alone, I think, is the most extraordinary achievement, especially in these trying times. So there's no shortage of money. The question will be, will the vision live up to it? And the only thing that's given me some note of caution, I think, was the announcement that in this new wing, they're going to put art all the way up to the present day. So previously, as you know, the National Gallery's kind of stopped in around about the early 20th century, but now it's going to go all the way through to modern contemporary art. What do you think of that?
I think that is potentially a difficult bit of territory just to move into. I mean, because basically that's what the Tate's meant to do, isn't it? Tate is meant to be modern and contemporary. So they're going to have to iron out some kind of agreement between themselves. The National Gallery is meant to stop at 1900. I know there are a few things that go slightly over that, but basically it stops at the arrival of modern art. So now that's going to be included. And I was a little bit worried about it until I realized that they are still going to be dealing with paintings. In other words, they're not moving out of the world of paintings. So as long as we're not having to go into the worlds of installations and conceptual art, and Marcel Duchamp and video art and all that, but we're staying with the story of paintings, then I can see a consistency there. And I mean, I already we are at the cusp of, for example, Picasso's Cubism when we go to the National Gallery. It will be exciting, I think, to have that storyline taken further. I mean, it is a bit of an arbitrary division, isn't it, 1900? But it depends how they do it. As for Finaldi, my, what a smooth talker he is. I mean, I've met him at many occasions now. I mean, he could talk the pants off a donkey, couldn't he? Very, very impressive guy. No wonder they knighted him. No wonder he collected all this money. I mean, even though I was a bit rude about his rehang, he was all over me and so nice. I mean, he's just a natural diplomat, a natural schmoozer. And I guess he's going to go down as one of the really important National Gallery directors. I mean, this is the biggest rebuild since it opened, isn't it? I mean, since whatever it was, 1824, I think. It's quite a thing to have notched on your walking stick, isn't it?
Yeah, and if he pulls it off, we should make him a lord. But I think it's going to be a
Oh, hang on,
challenge
hang
for
on, but
Tate.
that no, you're the Baron of the Borders. You can't have too many people fighting for your position up there in the major House of Lords. You can't
All
have
right, well, he could be a
Baron
baronet.
Gabriel Finaldi as well.
But it's going to be a challenge for Tate, definitely. I don't know if you saw in the press release when the National Gallery announced this, there was a little quote from Maria Balshaw, who was director of the Tate, saying, "Looking forward to working together on this." And that was interpreted as her, saying, "Oh, this is great. The National Gallery is going to be putting its tanks on my lawn." But if you read between the lines, a bit of Kremlinology here, I don't think she was agreeing at all. So we'll see how
Right.
that plays out.
Well, the Tate is having problems, isn't it? I mean, its visitor numbers have gone down. It's had to change around quite a few things. We've got a new director. It hasn't been producing very many exciting exhibitions for a while. The big installations in the Turbine Hall have been dull. You do think that they are in need of help, and it wouldn't surprise me if this was something else they really didn't need on their plates to be dealing with at the moment. But anyway, for the rest of us, it is an exciting moment, and after the fantastically busy 200-year anniversary celebrations we've literally just gone through, they finished this summer, didn't they, at the National Gallery? I guess we can wait a bit for the next bunch. Any other big stories this last few weeks, Bendy, we should be talking about?
I was quite struck by the Banksy furore, another Banksy furore. Did you see that? He did this quite clever bit of graffiti stencil on the walls of the Royal Courts of Justice, which showed a protester holding a sign being beaten quite violently around the head by a bewigged judge holding a gavel. Did you like that? Did you think it was worthy of all the attention?
Well, I didn't see it in the flesh. I only saw all the reports of it. Although I've seen quite a few Banksys in my time. I mean, it's a smart thing for him to do, isn't it? I mean, he really does know how to poke the bear. Obviously inspired by reactions, I think, to the various Palestinian marches that have been going on. There's a lot of anger directed at protesters who are making their views felt about the situation in Gaza. And he has a history for this, you know. I mean, he goes back a long way with Palestine. You know, he's got a hotel actually in Bethlehem. So that is to say, on the Palestinian side of the wall, the horrible wall that the Israelis built. And the hotel, which is called the Walled Off Hotel, boasts because it says it's got the worst view of any hotel in the world, and that is true because when you look out, all you see is this gigantic wall built by the Israelis across the middle of Bethlehem. So he has a history with the Palestinian cause, and he paid for that hotel. He's had shops and displays and exhibitions in Bethlehem, right opposite the church of the where Jesus Christ was supposed to have been born. I mean, he's gone right to the heart of it all. So from that on that level, if it is indeed specifically intended as a protest about the government banning Palestinian action groups and making it basically illegal to belong to the organization, you can see why he would have wanted that to be as noticeable as possible, and also why he would have perhaps chosen the Royal Courts of Justice to paint it on. But of course, they got rid of it now, haven't they?
Yeah, which I think was surely part of his plan, don't you think? Because they made this rather cack-handed attempt to brush it off, and then you were just left with a shadow of the original stencil, which made it, many people thought, slightly more powerful. And I tell you what was strange about it is when it was washed off and someone tweeted a photograph of this shadow on the Royal Courts of Justice, I quote tweeted this at saying, I thought, very banal observation that this was exactly what Banksy would have wanted. The weird thing is that was my most viral tweet ever, right? It just took off. It got 11 million views and something like 400,000 likes, which is no reflection on my tweet, but it is a reflection on how Banksy is. He's right up there, mega global superstar artists, and his images really know how to cut through, don't they? I mean, I think it's admirable and clever. The only question is, I'd love to get your views on this, is whether you think it's going to last. I mean, the great art is the stuff that cuts through not just today, but forever. So do you think if you're going around a gallery in 100 or 200 years' time, will you see something like that Banksy or the remains of it on a wall?
Well, no, of course not, because you can't put it on a wall. It's already on a wall, and to put it on a wall, you have to cut the wall out and then stick it on another wall.
Well, they're
Um,
doing that, though, with some of his stuff,
They,
aren't
oh, and
they?
of course they are. They did it in Palestine when I was there, and in Bethlehem. He painted a mural featuring one of the local dogs. You know, Bethlehem's plagued by dogs. There are thousands of wild dogs roaming all over the place. And he did a little mural with a dog in it. But I mean, by the next day, someone had come along and cut it out. And I guess it was on eBay a week later or whatever happens to his work. He has his finger on the pulse, although, do you know what? Perhaps less so than he used to. I mean, I've got a couple of Banksy works. I've got one that I bought in Palestine at this shop that he opened in Bethlehem, selling his prints, trying to raise money for the Palestinian cause. I bought one. And about 5 or 6, 7 years ago, I remember looking it up and it was worth £10,000, I think it was. It
Blimey.
was something like that. I looked it up recently. It had gone down to 1,200. So,
Oh, I'm surprised
um,
by that. Wow.
no, his prices are dropping. I mean, the art world's dropping anyway, generally, but even he has been a little bit short of big stories. I mean, I had a go with him. I know him sort of better than most people, I think, in that I've had quite a lot of email correspondence with him. I'm
Right.
quite pally with his manager, and
Uh-huh.
I've appeared in a couple of his films, and I've appeared saying what a good thing I thought he was. And this was right at the beginning, when graffiti art was trying to make its way off the streets and into, as it were, the art world. And he reached out to me a bit through his manager and stuff. And so I've kind of favoured him in the past. I've reviewed his shows. I like the fact that he's communicating directly with people. Anyway, a few years ago, I don't know if you remember, but there was a situation in Reading, my hometown Reading,
Hmm.
where the Reading jail, where Oscar Wilde had written De Profundis, and that fantastic poem was inspired, the one about, the prisoner looking up and seeing the patch of blue, that's the sky and all that. So Reading jail had been closed down, and there was a plan to make it into an art centre. But the government didn't want to do that. The government wanted to sell it and put up flats, so luxury flats. So Banksy was part of this um, effort to turn it into an art centre. And he donated or offered to donate one of the stencils, which is the rare thing that he actually makes the work out of the thing that he did on the outside wall. So on the outside of the wall of Reading Prison, he put this guy escaping from prison, whom everybody interpreted as Oscar Wilde. It's a guy with a typewriter escaping from the prison. So he's going to put that up for sale, and it was going to go for millions of quid, and he was going to give the millions of quid to the Reading Council to build this art centre. And he got me involved, and I said, "Yeah, that's fantastic. Of course, I'll write about it." So I wrote about it. There's a big piece in the Sunday Times, and basically, kind of no one noticed. I thought it was going to be a huge scandal, and I was going to get on news at 10, and people were going to say, "Do you think Reading Jail should be turned into an art centre?" And I was going to say, "Yes," and I agree with Banksy. But basically, no one noticed. And I think that's because Reading, unfortunately, is a town that people tend to drive through. It's a kind of tragic situation when it comes to the fame of the city. So whereas, he does something on the Royal Courts of Justice, it's
Yeah,
going to get noticed because it's under the notice
yeah,
of everybody in London. He does something really important, really wonderful, and exciting in Reading, and most people didn't see it happening. So
yeah.
yeah, I have a tear in my eye about that.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. I think that tells us a lot about how art is seen these days. It's basically linked to notoriety and fame. And that goes back to my question as whether this will last. Great art has values that connects with people throughout all time, doesn't it? Irrespective of what the news they're living through is. So whether his stuff will last, I don't know. We'll have to see.
It won't, will it? I mean, it won't. It can't do because so much of its impact depends on its location, its situation. In a way, my Reading story proves it as well. In Reading, do it there, nobody really minds.
Mm.
Do it in the Royal Courts of Justice, it becomes a big issue. So stick that wall up in Tate Modern, and it won't have the same feeling as it has if you've got the outlaw Banksy
Yeah.
turning up at night and doing this thing on the Royal Courts of Justice. That has a sort of contemporary Robin Hoody mood to it, doesn't it? That perhaps it
Yeah.
can't ever have in a gallery.
Yeah.
And artistically, I mean, they're kind of clever cartoons, aren't they? That's what they are. I mean, no one can pretend they're more than that. So they're all about context, all about context. In 100 years' time, the context won't be there anymore. And I guess Banksy will still be notorious, but I can't see him being valued in the way he is now.
Yeah. Well, interesting.
Okay, having rubbished Banksy, having had our doubts about the National Gallery extension, let's have a little break, shall we? Because we're back after all this time, and quite honestly, I'm a bit knackered already.
Waldy and Bendy.
Hello, we're back with Waldy and Bendy's Adventures in Art, the podcast they could not stop, although they did try very, very, very hard. And I suppose one of the reasons they tried so hard is that sometimes you get stuff being talked about on this podcast that is, I don't know, perhaps better left untalked about.
Tales of the Art World.
Yes, it's Tales from the Art World, Bendy. And normally Tales from the Art World are about other people, but I've decided to rewrite this. I mean, you've done your book, and we're going to talk about that very soon on the podcast. And I've also been making a big TV series recently for Sky Arts, and it's a pretty dark and difficult and interesting series. So it's a three-parter for Sky Arts, and the first film is called Art's Most Erotic. Second film, Art's Most Horrific. And the third film, Art's Most Satanic. Now, before I tell you all about it, what do you think of those titles?
Very appropriate for you, I think, because these are words that are in my word cloud when I picture in my mind. Satanic, erotic, lustful, all of these things are associated with you. But spoiler alert, I have actually seen the first program because Taya sent me the link and I loved it. Really, vintage Valdi stuff. Superb.
You sweet talker. Someone should put you on a podcast. I mean, honestly, you're like a beautiful chocolate mousse when you speak. It's, you know what it is. Although we're making it sound too exciting and superficial. It's basically quite an important thing I believe in, which is that the myth of civilization is that, well, the classic Kenneth Clark idea of what civilization is takes us through some very straight and great paths. So, Raphael fits in, Michelangelo fits in, neoclassicism fits in. There's a kind of journey from the Greeks to Cubism, or let's say, where we progressed, as it were, up a mountain. As a society, our art reflected our own personal growth and civilizational aspirations and all that, right? Some of that happened, but at the same time, on exactly the same time scale, there was all sorts of stuff going on in art that never fitted, that does not fit the Kenneth Clark journey. Erotic art basically has always been there. It's always been there. I would argue that sex in art has actually been amongst the most important of all subjects. I mean, it surely has. And in the series, we start with the Venus of Willendorf, which is this lovely fertility statue that was discovered. And many people think is the oldest known sculpture. It's certainly up there amongst those early Venuses. And it's a nude woman, pendulous breast, but also with her genitalia kind of emphasized. And it had to be some sort of fertility token, something sort of amulet that you rubbed or carried around with you. Why? Because as a species, we have had nothing more important to do in our history than to survive. And to survive, you need babies. And to have babies, you need stimulation sometimes. So this whole idea of the importance of sex in human society has been recorded in art. It's been recorded every single step of the way, from a sort of crucial fertility bringing thing to some of the riskier stuff that people are doing these days, And it's a really important journey in art, I think, one that hasn't been tackled. And so, yeah, I'm tackling it. And I'm glad you enjoyed the first film because I'm sure you remember we went to some hairy places.
Yeah, this is a family podcast, and we don't want Spotify and so on to to censor us and put us behind a kind of a post-watershed moment. I thought it was a little bit hairy in parts, a little bit scandalous, but I have to say I'm I'm not sure about the whole terminology of erotic. Perhaps I'm misunderstanding the broader phrases here and definitions, but or maybe I'm just not seeing it in the same way, but I have to honestly say I've never looked at a painting, at least, um, and found it erotic, by which I mean sort of arousing or stimulating. Is that something that you have sensed? I mean, does it work like that for you? I mean, I find often it can move me to tears and it'd be beautiful and sublime and all that kind of stuff, but it's never worked for me. What am I doing wrong?
Um, you're a man of your times. I think you could probably draw a line through all this, which starts with the invention of photography, when, as it were, real sexual stimulation became recordable. So both for men and for women, you could actually see a kind of reality, the real thing, the real nude man, the real nude woman. But before that, uh, before photography existed and reality didn't exist, you just had the approximations, didn't you? Sculpture.
Mm.
And of course, I mean, that's the whole idea of the Pygmalion myth, isn't it? Is that, the sculptor falls so in love with a statue that he smears it with sperm when he's left in there overnight with her. I can't imagine myself being overly stimulated by Titian's Venus of Urbino, let's say, or
Mhm.
in any of the really famous nudes in art. No, they don't press my button today, but that's because I grew up in a world where the Sun had page three appearing in it all the time, and where you can't really move into a newsagents without seeing stuff and whatever. Yeah, we've become desensitized to the erotic power of stuff like that. But if you go back in time, I mean, artists were producing some very risky things, and right up until the time of Picasso, there was a whole genre of sort of pornographic and erotic art. And it must have worked. I mean, why else would they have made it? And why else would there have been so much money in it? It must have worked, Bendor.
Yeah, I suppose I see it as more of a power play, really. Even back in the day, I mean, the Venus of Urbino is a great example. And isn't it interesting, by the way, that we called Venus of Willendorf a Venus? was, many tens of thousands of years before Venus even existed as a concept. So it just goes back to this idea of sanitizing the nude and the erotic. We're two blokes talking about erotic art on a podcast, so we do have to think about the male gaze. But I think this really has such an important role to play, at least in Western art. Something like the Venus of Urbino, it is plainly a courtesan, a prostitute, and Titian is working in Venice, which is a port city. Lots of sailors around. They regulated prostitution, they taxed it, they thought it was pretty okay. Um, and it's just this idea of sanitizing that kind of basic human experience, isn't it, on one level? And the classicizing motifs and the stories of Venus and later in the Swan is all about, it's a kind of fig leaf, isn't it? But at heart, I still don't know if whoever commissioned the Venus of Urbino was kind of turned on by it, or whether it was more about, because money and art always go together, and is it more about I'm rich and this is my courtesan and I'm in charge and I'm showing off to my friends what I can get up to? I'm not quite sure. And perhaps, as you say, because we're men of our time, we'll never really be able to be objective about it.
I think so. I can't imagine, at least in terms of the commission, the wanting to have this sprawling nude whose hand is delicately rubbing herself, on the wall of your bedroom, even in Renaissance times, or particularly in Renaissance times. I can't see how that would not have been done for anything other than some sort of titillatory reasons. I'll tell you what, just going back to the National Gallery, one of the good things I think about the fact that we're going to get this new painting, 20th century painting in the collection is we might see more women artists.
Mm.
We're bound to, aren't we? And we might see some more modern nudes that have a kind of different storyline. I'm expecting to have a sort of expansion of that really in it. But anyway, look, my film is the first in a three-part series. I mean, the next one, the horrific one, is ghastly too. The satanic one is dangerously satanic. They're about to start on Sky Arts on September the 30th at 9 o'clock. So, I mean, I know that it is just two old blokes talking about stuff here on this podcast, but I hope you watch it because, above all, I think, I went to a lot of places. I went to India, I went to Japan, and of course, I also went to England and did Cookham and Stanley Spencer. And I think one of the interesting things that emerged for me was how different countries have a different response and a different attitude to eroticism and sexuality in art. So
Yeah.
hopefully people will notice that.
I think the big difference has got to be the Bible, hasn't it? Don't you think? I mean, there's no coincidence that in European painting, at least, because we have the Old Testament and the Catholic Church telling us that sex can be sinful and usually is, that we have to come up with these kind of fig leaves, the classicizing stories and the allegories. That surely is what's driving half of it, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm sure you're right. I mean, basically, a lot of our culture involves a lot of pretending, and a lot of other people's culture doesn't.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah,
truth of it, isn't it?
yeah.
All right, hopefully, people will watch. Bendy, thank you for a few kind words on it. We're now going to move on to something, right? We're going to move on to, I think, my favorite feature from the podcast back in the day is when we imagined what we'd like to have hanging on the wall of our house. If we were rich, we could have anything we wanted. Which picture could we put up on there? And so we've retained that on the wall. And I must say, Bendy, I'm absolutely shocked. Yes, shocked by what you've chosen this time. On the wall. So, Bendor Grosvenor, tell us what you've chosen and why.
This is a self-portrait by an artist I love, actually, the German artist Johann Zoffany, and it's in the National Gallery of Parma. And it's quite small. It's 43 by 39 centimeters. And what we see is Zoffany, who by this time was a big deal in Europe. He'd worked for King George III and Queen Charlotte in London, and he was patronized by the Habsburgs, and he's at the court of Parma here, working for the Duke and Duchess of Parma. And he's decided to paint this really, really curious self-portrait. And what we see is him in a white smock, looking a little bit disheveled, so his hair is slightly undone. And he's putting on a monk's habit. I think he's putting it on. Now, you're good on these monk's habit. Is that Franciscan or Capuchin? It's a brown
That looks
habit.
Franciscan to me, the brown one. Yeah, I think it's a Franciscan habit. I'm pretty sure he's putting it on
Yeah.
because he's got his hands stretched out, hasn't he, around the hood as if it's going to go on his head. That's my feeling about it anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So he's looking disheveled. He's putting it on. As ever, in pictures like this, there are so many clues for us to get our teeth into. So behind him, on the left of the picture, is his easel, his brush and his paints, and he's put them down. And then on the wall above him on the right, we've got a shelf. And on the top of the shelf, we see a wine bottle, a glass with some wine in it. And beside that are some playing cards, which are balanced quite precariously on the shelf. And then there's a skull. You're good at this stuff. This is the kind of classical vanitas of a staple of Western painting, an allegory of the good things in life, drink and gambling, and a reminder of death could strike at any time.
Yep, definitely. You can't see a skull in a painting like this without it being a vanitas symbol. So it's all about how short life is. Therefore, what kind of person are we? Are we ready for the next stage?
Yeah. Here's where it gets really interesting for our earlier discussion, I think, because underneath the shelf, pinned to a wall, is a print of Titian's Venus of Urbino. So we see her reclining there. It's black and white. Now, the curious thing is it's half torn off, and it looks like that in front of her, the most naked part of her, there's a piece of paper has been pinned onto it. Is that what you see? I think it's a piece of paper. Something is kind of covering up.
But yeah, I don't know what it is. I recognize the Venus of Urbino. I thought maybe something stuck on the front. I don't know what that is, but it's a mystery in a picture that's basically packed with mysteries as far as I can see.
Yeah. And then beside the print, we've got a rosary that's pinned on the wall. And then here's, well, I'll just get straight to it. Pinned on the wall beside the rosary are two condoms. Now, did you know that this is the earliest instance in Western painting where you see condoms? So there
Oh
they are.
no.
And in those days, condoms were reusable. So you used them and then you hung them on the wall to be used again. And here's where the picture becomes even more shocking, I think, is because if you were to turn it round, and look on the back, you would find a straight up religious picture. It's a rest on the flight to Egypt. So we see Christ in the arms of Mary, Joseph having a bit of a rest in the background, and a landscape background behind them. And this kind of double vision is really quite rare in painting. Various meanings have been attached to this picture. For the great scholar of Zoffany's life, Mary Webster, she interprets it as Zoffany returning to England in a frame of mind where he wants to be more pure in his life, and he's turning his back on sex and sin and drinking and gambling, and he might even be turning his back on his art, his painting, and he's putting on the monk's habit. It's a sort of straight up, I'm going to be a little bit more religious now in my life. I'm going to be a good boy. Does that what message do you see? Do you see that message there?
Mm.
I'm not sure I do.
No, not. Do you know what? What to me counts against that is the expression on his face. And that is not an expression of someone who is confidently or even nervously, but they're somehow looking ahead to a change of life. That is someone who is dealing with something, I think, sad and tragic. I think the meaning of this picture has got to be something loaded with the kind of portentousness that you get with that skull on the shelf. It's something deep going on here. Definitely something deep, I would say.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. No, I think the key with Zoffany, I always found, is he liked to joke, actually. He was capable of deep thought. So some of his pictures are quite profound, but he also loved to joke. He's a bit like Hogarth in that respect. And unusual as a German artist. He picked up the English sense of humor, we might say. I think the key to this picture is understanding where it was made and where it is still now. It's in Parma. And he was working, as I said, at the court of Ferdinando I. Now, Ferdinando I was an absolute sex maniac and couldn't get enough of it. He had a special carriage which he would tour his estates and woe betide anyone who came in front of him and caught his eye. If you're a peasant woman, you wanted to run away. Now, he would atone for his sins, Ferdinando I, by immediately going and saying Mass afterwards. And he persuaded himself that he was actually very religious. In fact, he used to describe himself sometimes as a monk. So I think Zoffany is reflecting on the licentiousness of the surroundings around him and the person who he'd worked for. And I think the condoms actually have a particular purpose here because old Ferdinando had various troubles that he had caught, and that marked his activities. So the other interesting thing about the picture is the date of it. Unusually, Zoffany has actually given his signature and he signed it the 13th of March, 1779. And I think that date is significant because on the 12th of March, the day before, he'd got official permission to leave the court of Parma. And I think he couldn't wait to leave. And I think he was leaving behind a joke for some friend of his about the kind of the double life of the Duke and the court that he'd been forced to work in. And that is why we see a picture with two sides of it, two
Mm.
meanings. What do you think?
I think I disagree with you. First of all, Zoffany and jokes, yes, yes, yes. I mean, one of the best things about him, and there's that fabulous show at the Royal Academy, wasn't there, a few years ago, where it kind of rescued him. Because I must admit, I'd never previously rated him too highly until, I mean, I started to look more closely at his jokes and his self-portraits are amazing. I mean, there's another great one where he pretends to be David, doesn't he, slaying Goliath, and it's got him holding the head of Goliath. So he takes on these roles, and he does like a joke. I mean, and he had an extraordinary life as well, didn't he? I mean, didn't he actually go to India at some point to paint portraits of the Maharajas in India, and then he came back. So he knew about life.
Yeah, he ran out of
But
money, so he had to go to India to make his fortune again.
yeah, and then he came back, right? I don't think if you're in the court of somebody really rich and powerful, I don't think you make work that in any way kind of mocks them. I just don't think that Zoffany or anybody else, frankly, would have dared to do that. But as it happens, right, from a previous life and a previous set of investigations, I know a bit about the history of condoms. Yeah, yeah. I mean, so they were obviously invented way back. You know, the Romans had them probably. They kind of came into the Roman in Britain in the sort of 17th century, didn't they? So they're made out of cat gut, weren't they, or lamb gut, and various sort of flexible bits of inner animal. And as you said, they could be reused, washed and dried and used again. But see, the key thing is, right? Do you know why they were worn? So they weren't worn because everybody wanted to shag everybody else. The real reason was that everybody was afraid of getting syphilis. So the English shagging classes were scared stiff, as it were, of catching the dreaded disease. That's principally why condoms came to be so much in use. When you were a schoolboy, did anybody in your circle ever refer to them as rubber johnnies? Did you remember?
Uh,
Does that ring a bell?
yes, well, more my sort of, parents' generation, I think. That's,
Your
yeah.
parent generation, yes, okay. Well, I mean, I'm probably older than you then, so I do remember people calling them rubber johnnies, and condoms were called that because there was a guy in 17th century London called Johnny Mills, and Johnny Mills cornered the market in great condoms, and so everybody who wanted to get one went to Johnny Mills to get their condom, and so Johnny Mills became sort of Johnny, and then just as Hoover became the word one used for a vacuum cleaner, so Johnny became the word for a condom. But if we think of this, right, going back to this religious context, right, if we think of this as a serious self-portrait, and if we think of the condoms as being there for this other reason, which is as a kind of preservation against syphilis, does that not tie us in more closely with these other memento mori, these vanitas illusions that are taking place around the picture? So, there's a rosary hanging next to the condom and a rosary hanging next to the Venus of Urbino. That is surely meant to mean something quite significant. And I think Zoffany, who was a complex person who did like a laugh, is casting himself here as someone who is troubled with his own past. You talk about his Duke in Parma being a notorious womanizer. Well, Zoffany did his bit as well, didn't he? I know when he came back from India, he'd had loads of children in India by his various Indian mistresses. He was hardly blameless in his sex life. So I think we're looking at one of those pictures where a troubled person who's got a chance to do a self-portrait has loaded it with deep meanings and a sense of regret about his own sins. And I think there's something going on here, particularly if you look at the expression on his face, a kind of remorse, a sense of, I wish I hadn't done that. And the role of the condom is to be part of the memento moris. It's one of the bad things that happen if you take too much pleasure in life, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he's clearly done something because I think that's why his hair is disheveled. And you're right, he does look slightly mournful. I suppose the question is whether he is going through the same procedure which must have, common and clearly experienced by the Duke of Parma, of doing something sinful, which you regret. And because you're a good Catholic, you say your prayers, but then, well, off you go again. And whether it's about the cycle continuing or whether he's really trying to turn over a new leaf, I think you make many, many interesting points. I would just push back on one thing, actually, about Duke Ferdinando, because although he was the Duke of Parma, he wasn't all powerful. He
Mm.
was so inept and so obsessed with his kind of personal goings on that actually his wife, Maria Amalia, the Habsburg princess, she was a sister of Marie Antoinette of France, by the way.
Mm.
She was actually the one who called the shots. Actually, I happen to know, I wasn't going to mention this. I've just remembered um, a picture I discovered many, many years ago, a lost Zoffany, right? It's in the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston now. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. Um,
Mm.
and this came up at auction as a kind of unknown artist about 15 years ago now, and it cost literally hundreds of pounds. It's by Zoffany, right? And
Mm.
it is of Maria Amalia, the Duchess of Parma, and it is mocking the Duke of Parma because he is only seen in a portrait, and the portrait is above an empty chair, kind of throne. And Maria Amalia is there, and she's still calling the shots.
Mm.
So you make a very strong case that it's as much about Zoffany, and I think I agree with you there. But actually, I think it's a sort of play on so many things, and he's pleased to be leaving that kind of circumstance where he'd
How
been working for
exciting.
the Duke of Parma.
Mm. No, I didn't know you'd found a Zoffany. See, I mean, we all know that's what you do. You hunt down sleepers, lost masterpieces. I mean, you found more sleepers than the Wichita lineman, haven't you? But I didn't know about the Zoffany. That is exciting. So just quickly, my final point on the condom. It's hanging next to a rosary. It's hanging next to the Venus of Urbino. So the rosary is between the two things. This is a picture about choices and about maybe some of the bad choices that one's made. And it is a picture in which desire and, if you like, damnation are being shown each other across the divide, really. We were making a choice between it, as we do in these big moments when we think back at our lives. So I just think it's a deep picture, and it certainly, I'll tell you one thing's for sure, that it raises Zoffany, in my estimation, several rungs up the ladder of art, because, I mean, he was a very interesting self-portraitist, and this is a crackingly complex and interesting picture. Thanks for bringing it to our attention so loudly, Bendy.
Good. I love to bang the drum for Zoffany. I think he's really worth deeper thought, actually, because it goes back to what we were saying earlier. My final point on all this is I think he was actually quite aware, or as aware as one could be in those days as an artist working for rich male patrons, of so much stuff around the male gaze. And I'd love to leave people with a link to that fantastic group portrait he does of the Royal Academicians. It's the first group portrait of the Royal Academicians in London. And they're all there, aren't they? All these male artists. And they're studying the nude, a male nude model. And they've got their candlelight and they've got their drawing. And it's all about, aren't we being great artists studying from life? And there were two female artists at the time, Mary Moser and Angelica Kaufman. But because of the ridiculous rules of the time, they weren't allowed to be studying from life. They're not allowed in the life drawing class. So Zoffany, I think, is quite aware of that and puts their portraits on the wall in quite a prominent place. Now, you could say that he's just accepting the unfortunate realities they had to go through, or you could say he's highlighting their plight. We'll have to leave that up to the
Mm.
viewers.
Such an interesting picture. By the way, Benji, something you didn't bring up that I thought you would. There's that story that Zoffany is probably the only artist who was also a cannibal. Have you heard that story?
I have heard that story, but Martin Postle, who is one of the great experts on this, has thoroughly debunked it. So it didn't actually happen, but it was a good tale. The story is that on his way to India, there was a shipwreck or some pirates got involved and he ended up having to eat someone. But I wish it was true. Sadly, it's not.
Thank God for that. Anyway, plenty of other interesting things about him. By the way, I forgot to mention that, we are actually doing this podcast now on the ZCZ channel on YouTube as well. So all those lucky listeners out there, they can also watch it. Now, the great plus with that is that you get a really good look at all the pictures we've been talking about, all the people we've been talking about, and you get to see the very, very, very handsome Bendy, the Baron of the Borders in real life. So don't forget to go to the ZTZ channel on YouTube and watch this podcast as it goes out. And on that jolly, jolly note, I think I'm ready to say goodbye, Bendy. So from me, it's goodbye.
And it's goodbye from me. And one final thing, ladies and gentlemen, dear listeners, to help us in our plans for worldwide podcast domination, it would be very helpful if you would give us a little review online, or only if you like it, and tell your friends, and then our plans will become much easier.
Waldy and Bendy.